worship Him. We'll just look at Him and say, Lord, I love you. But today we're going to talk about, let me see. Faith. It's like our verse said in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, faith. For without faith it is impossible to please God. Faith. These are the days of faith. I've been thinking about that all week. These are the days of faith. I said it regarding the conference that we have coming up. Because these are the days of faith. Because in years to come, when conferences are going to be done, it's just going to be a matter of announcing dates and watching people sign up. Getting it done, knowing that God is going to do His thing. But these are the days of faith. When we're approaching the conference date. And looking at numbers and on paper and numbers of people, who signed up and those kind of things, and just telling God, you know what, Lord, if this is going to happen, it's because you made it happen. And standing on that and believing that these are the days of faith. Just knowing that God is going to do it. It's just. It just feels good knowing that we did our part. But the rest is in God's hands. The rest, whatever comes from this point forward, is what God did, what God allowed, what God brought about. And as I was thinking just on that for this past week, a couple of weeks actually, the phrase came to mind, faith tested and faith demonstrated. And what is the difference between the two? Faith tested, faith demonstrated. And what came to mind was that they're two sides of the same coin. Two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. You can't do one without the other. You can't have a heads without a tails. You can't have a tails without a heads. You flip it up in the air, it's going to land on either side. It's going to land on one of those sides. Faith tested versus faith demonstrated. They're the same, two sides of the same coin. Because when your faith is tested, it requires a demonstration of the faith that we profess, that we claim, that God has actually given a measure of to every man. And to demonstrate faith, you don't demonstrate faith unless there's a test. So there are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Our scripture says, for without faith it is impossible to please God. Actually, it says, for without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. Without faith it is impossible to please God. Impossible is an absolute word. There's no gray area. If it's impossible, it simply cannot be done. It is impossible. Many things that we look at in and of our own power that we know are impossible to do. Just can't do it. I cannot go outside and jump to the top of this building. It is impossible for me to do. But if I go outside and there's an absolute need for me to jump to the top of that building that's going to honor and glorify God and not me, then God will make me do it. He will make me do it. But without faith, it is impossible to please God. Without faith, it is critical to the believer because we're talking about pleasing God. Without faith, we have no hope of pleasing God. You cannot please God. Without faith, there's no hope of pleasing God. It just can't be done. Absolutes in the Bible are absolute. When we say it's absolute, then there's no two ways about it. 2 plus 2 is 4. That's absolute. 2 plus 2 is never going to equal 5. It's never going to equal 3. 2 plus 2 equals 4. And that's absolute. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Whenever God uses the words always or never or in the Bible to describe himself, that's to describe himself or the kingdom of God or any attribute about himself. That's an absolute. The word even says that nothing is impossible with God. It's impossible to please God without faith, but the word also says that nothing is impossible with God. Matthew chapter 19 verse 26, Mark chapter 10 verse 27, Luke chapter 1 verse 38, and Luke chapter 18 verse 27. They're also absolutes. They're saying nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is impossible with God. That would be a sermon all by itself, but that's not what we're talking about. That's just an example of when we talk about the absolutes that God uses when he talks about himself. Nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is an absolute. It doesn't say all things. It doesn't say some things. It doesn't say any of that. It says nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is impossible with God. God, if it needs to be done, for the advancement of the kingdom, for the accomplishment of the goal, if it needs to be done for God's purpose, with God it can be done. With God it will be done if it needs to be done. With God it is possible. God expects us to have faith. He wouldn't be God if he didn't expect us to have faith. To say that, for the word to say it's impossible to please God without faith, it's safe to say that God expects us to have faith. Why does he expect us to have faith? Because he has given us faith. Romans chapter 12 verse 3 tells us that God has given each of us a measure of faith. It actually says to every man God has given a measure of faith. So without prior coordination, Mom gets up and talks about faith, using an excellent example of sitting in a chair. You didn't test that chair before you sat in it. You sat in it before. You sat in others like it before. You sat in chairs before. Chairs, you see a chair, it's built, you expect that chair to hold you up, so you sit down in it. You don't interview that chair. You don't put the chair through tests. You simply sit down on the chair. Like, remember when I picked you up yesterday? Kevin was telling us the story about he fixed the chair. He thought he fixed the chair, sat in it, and the chair fell. He had faith in that chair. He had faith in his skills to fix that chair. Chair let him down, literally. He should have tested the chair. He didn't test the chair. The chair fell. He had faith in that chair. The chair let him down. But God gives us all a measure of faith. Every man has a measure of faith. It says every man. It doesn't say, in this point, it doesn't say only believers have a measure of faith. It says every man has a measure of faith. God has given each of us that measure of faith. That faith that is within us, faith is alive. Faith is alive. Faith is not an inanimate object. Faith is alive. How do we know? Because faith can grow. Faith can be strengthened. Faith is alive. That faith that has been placed within us is looking to connect. It's got to be connected. Faith has to be connected to something. Faith just does not sit idly. Faith is looking to connect to something. That faith that God placed within us is looking to connect with something so that it can be strengthened and so that it can grow. If a man rejects God, that faith within it will connect with something else. And that something else could be anything. It could be money. It could be education. It could be false teachings or false gods. It could be relationships. It could be family, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, children, whatever relationship you connect to. That can become your God. That can become the thing that your faith connects itself to. Faith is meant to grow. Faith is meant to be strengthened. But faith must be firmly planted on a solid foundation in order to grow properly, in order to be properly strengthened. Just like our bodies. Our bodies require nutrients. Our bodies require food. Our bodies require water. If we fill our bodies with junk food, we'll feel full. Our bodies will feel full. Our bodies will grow. But they will not grow in a healthy way. It will not grow in a healthy way. Remember the movie Super Size Me? The man who ate McDonald's for 30 days straight. And what it did to his body. He was eating food. He was eating food. He wasn't starving himself. He was eating food. He was eating foods that in another form, in another configuration, he was eating meat. He was eating meat. Meat is good. Meat by itself is okay. Okay, he was eating breads. Breads by themselves are okay. He was not even technically, he was eating vegetables. Because there's onions and tomatoes on a hamburger. He was eating vegetables. French fries, though that's a potato. It's a starch. Vegetable. Whatever it is. I'm studying my food groups again. But it's a starch and but it's food. I think he had milkshakes too. Milk is in milkshakes, dairy, So the food groups, they all represented there. And his body was taking it in, but his body started shutting down on him. His body wasn't growing in a healthy manner. This is how faith is. This is how the faith that God places within us. If that faith isn't being fed properly, if that faith isn't based on a proper foundation, when the test comes, when the trial comes, that faith is going to crumble. That faith is going to crumble. Just like the parable of the two builders, one who built his house on the rock, one who built his house on the sand. If our faith is built on the rock, which is Jesus Christ, when the storm comes, the house will not fall. If our faith is built on the sand, which is anything other than Jesus, is sand. All other ground is sinking sand. On Christ the solid rock I stand. If our faith is connected to anything else besides God, when the storm comes, that faith is going to crumble. That faith is going to let us down. When that storm comes, and the storms are going to come. So our faith has to be properly fed. Our faith has to be placed upon the proper foundation. Our faith is alive. Our faith is looking to connect and grow within us. It needs something to connect to. So God's given every man a measure of faith. God's not wasteful in that faith. God's not wasteful in that faith. It's impossible to please God. For it's impossible to please God without faith. Then He must desire that we do more with our faith than put it on a shelf and use it for emergency situations only. Can't do it. That's not the proper use of our faith. Dig this analogy, okay? You have a sports team. I will use the Dallas Cowboys as an example. Dallas Cowboys are a sports team. They're a sports organization that has a history of having won some Super Bowls. They've lost some, they've won some, but they have a history of being a successful franchise. So much so that people really hate the Cowboys because they've won so much. A lot of organizations that have won a lot, people hate them just because they've won. But you would just use the Cowboys as an example here. Dallas Cowboys. They have a stadium, a new stadium. Okay, they have a new facility for the team to play in. They have a brand new facility that holds the big screen in the middle of the stadium. Costs more than the old stadium by itself. Yes, ridiculous, but it's huge. The Dallas Cowboys, this team, okay, what do they need to win? They need players. They don't need just any player. They need top quality players. Okay, they look at the draft is coming around. They look at the names. They see who's the best player, who meets the needs that they have. They recruit that player, and they sign that player to a contract, and they pay that player. They don't just pay that player. They don't just recruit him and play him, but they provide facilities for this player to come in and work out, to lift weights, to run and get in shape. They provide a trainer to tell him how to properly do it. They provide a nutritionist to tell him the right things to eat so that he can prove his talent. They provide coaches that are going to tell him how to get better at his position. Because he may have played in Pee Wee League, okay, and been good there. He might have played in junior high. He might have played in high school, and he was good at all of those places. If he's in the NFL, then he was probably good at all the other levels as well. Because it's hard to make it in the NFL without having been good at all those other levels. But generally speaking, he was good in high school. He must have been good in college in order to make it to the NFL. So he's got all these coaches. He's got all of these facilities. He's got the trainers. He's got the nutritionists. He's got all of these things. He's got the proper equipment to make sure he's going to have the opportunity to get better, to play well, to make the team better, so that the team can win championships, so that the team can make more money, because the fans are going to come in because they want to see this. But the team is also, they're going to have practices. Practices simulate games. Says the old saying says, as you practice, so shall you play. If you work hard in practice, if you study and get ready for practice, then when game time comes, it'll all come naturally. If you practice properly, if you practice well, if you practice hard, you're going to be a little bit better than the team. You're going to be more prepared than the team that you're going to be coming up against, because they're out there practicing too. They have facilities too. They have nutritionists. They have trainers. They have all of that. But this team doesn't just get a player and pay him money so that this player can go sit around and watch TV and eat, whatever, and just come out on Sunday and hope that he plays well enough to win. They're investing in this player to guarantee their success. But the thing is, they can't guarantee his success. They can't guarantee their success. Now, we're flipping it over. Bang! Now, we're on God's team. God has invested in us a measure of faith. He's put a measure of faith down inside of us. Now, this faith is alive. This faith has to be connected to something so that it can grow and be strengthened. It's this faith that God has given us. We're on God's team now. Where the NFL team had the facilities for the player to work out and to practice and to talk to the trainers and the coaches and the nutritionists and everybody. God has given us, the church, this place where our faith can be connected to, where our faith can grow, where our faith can be strengthened. The team had practices so that the player could run through game scenarios and be prepared for whatever situation the other team might bring up. God gives us everyday life to exercise our faith. He gives us opportunities to strengthen our faith. He gives us opportunities to exercise our faith. He gives us opportunities to practice that which the Word tells us we ought to do. Because when the test comes, when the storm comes, now it's game time. Now it's game time. Now it's time to put into practice everything that we've talked about, everything that God has prepared us for. By telling us faith. He's given us the measure of faith. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Faith. faith, in the spiritual sense, faith is a muscle. Faith has to be exercised. Faith has to be properly fed. Faith has to be connected to something. Your muscle on your body, your muscles are connected with tendons and with tendons and stuff. They connect to your bones. When a muscle, if a muscle tears or a muscle separates from where it's connected, painful, and that muscle cannot be used properly now, unless it be surgically reattached. If your faith isn't connected to anything, your faith is rendered useless. If your faith isn't connected to anything, so whether your faith is connected to God or it's connected to something improper, the faith is going to grow if it's connected to something improper. But when it comes time to test it, when it comes time, if your muscles are improperly fed, if your muscles are improperly trained, for athletes, Usain Bolt, before he runs a race, he warms up his muscles. He warms them up. He stretches them. If Usain Bolt gets in those blocks and he just drives to the stadium, gets dressed and thinks he's going to jump in those starting blocks and run the 100 meters and win, he might win, but it's more than likely that he's going to hurt his muscles because his muscles aren't prepared. He didn't warm them up. He didn't stretch them. So our faith has got to be tested, has got to be stretched in order for us to succeed in doing what God has for us to do. That's why he puts those tasks in front of us that require us to trust him, to have faith in him. So that when the enemy comes and says, you know what, you're not going to make it. You can't do it. Our faith, that muscle that God has been stretching, that muscle that God has been flexing. When you work out, when a person works out, there's a tearing process that goes on. You're actually tearing your muscles, and they get bigger because as they tear, they regenerate in the tears, and your muscles actually get bigger. So there has to be a tearing down and then a building up of the muscles. So when you read, when you say, God, it's all about you. God, if you don't help me, this is not going to succeed. And then the enemy comes in and says, you know what? It doesn't look like you're going to be able to make it. It doesn't look like you can't do this. It doesn't look like God's going to show up. I think you stepped out of line. I think you got ahead of God. You did this, that, and the other. You didn't wait for God. Your faith, when you say, get thee behind me, Satan, when you say, but God, you taking and flexing right in the enemy's face. Okay? That faith, you putting that enemy's head in a headlock and you're flexing all up on him and he's choking, he can't breathe. When you step out in faith, when you exercise your faith, and you do it the way God intended for us to do it. All these teams, they invest money in players, and there's no guarantee that player is going to do well for you. You can look on the online, look at all the news throughout sports history. How teams have paid a player a lot of money, and he didn't measure up to the standard or measure up to the expectations that were put upon it. Or somebody who was a real good athlete, but they got paid a lot of money, the team invested a lot in them, and they got hurt. Couldn't play the way the team expected them to. So they have no guarantee. They have a hope. They have no guarantee, but we have the guarantee. We have the guarantee. God promises the guarantee. And the guarantee is in the verse. Hebrews 11:6. Oops. And it says, but without faith it's impossible to please God. And it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Diligently seeking God is exercising your faith. Diligently seeking God is exercising your faith. You must believe that he is. You must believe that he is. Believe that he is. God rewards faith. Faith believes that God is. Believes that God is. And when we please God, when we exercise our faith, God rewards those who diligently seek Him. He rewards those who diligently seek Him. What is a reward? Payment for something that you've done. God's not, people teach dogs to do tricks. How do you teach dogs to do tricks? You reward them. Now we're not dogs doing tricks, not by any stretch of the imagination, but God desires to give us things. It's throughout His Word. For God so loved the world that He gave. For God so loved a sinful, nasty, dirty world that He gave. God so loved His creation that He created that turned away from Him that He gave. That He gave. He's trying to give us things. He gave us a measure of faith so that we wouldn't be expected to hear about God and have to develop a faith, because you couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. We wouldn't be able to do it without the measure of faith that God gave us. Every man has a measure of faith within him. Whether he connects that faith to God or not, it's totally up to him. And God will hold each man accountable for that. What you connect your faith to. Some connected their faith to money. A lot of people learned hard lessons about that. Some very, very rich people lost a lot of money a few years ago when the economy crashed. I don't remember the guy's name, but the guy was worth over, $40 billion. And when the economy crashed, he was down to $200 million. And that's the equivalent of me having $200 in my pocket and going down to 15 cents. That's how much he lost. His faith was in his money. I want to say that. If his faith was in his money, then his faith crumbled. His faith crumbled when he lost it all. Because as much as he thought he had, $40 billion, that's enough for generations to live off of. $40 billion. But he lost it all. But God has given us a measure of faith. And when that faith is tested, when that faith is demonstrated, when the test comes, when the trials come, that our faith is tested, and then we demonstrate faith, it gives God honor and glory. It pleases God. It pleases God. There's all these names. Later on in Hebrews chapter 11, it's referred to as the chapter of faith, or the hall of faith, some people call it. But all these names, Abel is listed here. Enoch, Noah, Abram and Sarah are listed. Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses' parents, Moses, Joshua and Rahab, and so many others. It was like for the time of the family. That was Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel. There's a lot of people listed in here. Notably in the faith chapter because of their faith. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Our faith is a very important thing because without it, it's impossible to please God. Without having our faith connected to God, without having our faith in a place where it can be used, where it can be exercised, where it can be molded, where it can be fed, then it is impossible to please God. Any person going back to the previous reference, we talked about, the guy joining the Dallas Cowboys. If you're not a member of the Dallas Cowboys, you don't have access to their facilities. You don't have the privilege of all of the things that you get by being a Dallas Cowboy. You can be a member of another NFL team. You can be a member of the Las Vegas Locos, an arena football team, but you don't have the privileges of being a Dallas Cowboy. You can't fly on the Dallas Cowboys plane. You can't do anything. You can't go into their facilities. Okay? And for NFL teams, it's just a matter of being different. Different's not always better. But the thing is, when you compare anything else to God, it's just not right. It's just not good for you. Put your faith in anything other than God, and it's not good for you. Because when the trials come, and they will come, whatever it is you have your faith in, whatever it is you have your faith connected to, will let you down. Will let you down. Because it just can't last. It can't stand the way God's truth stands. It can't stand the way the principle of the rock of Jesus Christ, it can't stand. Nothing can stand against it. And when I read things in the Bible like nothing is impossible with God, that's the team I want to be on. That's where I want to have my faith connected to. That's what I want to be. There's players out there right now in college that want to make it to the league. They want to play NFL football. And they have a team that they would rather, they all have a team they would rather play for. They all have a favorite team. They all have a team that they would rather play for. But on that day when that call comes and it's another team says we want to draft you, do you think they're going to say no? I'm hoping this other team will draft me. So thank you for your interest, but no, I'm going to wait. No, they're not. They're just happy to be in the league playing football. They're happy to because they've achieved that goal of playing football. If that team that they like so much happens to be the one drafting them, okay, they're good and they're happy. But there's nothing saying that they're gonna stay with that team forever. Players get traded all the time. Ask Peyton Manning. He wasn't traded, but he was released. He got hurt. He was older. They let him go, even though he led them, to a Super Bowl like within the last 4 years. Okay, now we're done with you. We're done with you. And that's just it. About the NFL, the NBA, baseball, and sports in general. The team, they're going to invest all this money in you, but when you're too old to get it done, when you can't get it done anymore, they're going to push you aside. They're going to push you aside. God's not going to push us aside. Because as long as our faith is connected to Him, as long as we're on His team, as long as we're standing with Him and striving with God, He's not going to push us aside. He's not going to retire us. He's not going to trade us because we get hurt. In fact, if we get hurt, God's going to heal us. He's already healed us. He's going to restore us. He's going to comfort us. He's going to do all of that for us. He has the facilities to do it. He has the technician. He's got the trainer. He's got the Holy Spirit. He's got Jesus, who by His stripes we were healed. He's got His healing hand. He's got all of this. He's got all of this ready and waiting, just in case we get hurt, just in case we fall on the wayside. God's got it. That's the team I want to be connected to. That's where I want to have my faith plugged into. Psalm 42, just quickly. You don't have to turn there, but I'm going to read part of it. Psalm 42:1 says, as the deer pants for the water brooks, so pants my soul for you, O God. That's the New King James Version. It goes on to say, my soul thirsts for God, for the living God. So you have a strong desire for God. That's what our faith, if a man will hear the word of God and use that faith that God has placed within us, you will see that that's what our soul is thirsting for. That's what our soul is crying out for, to be filled with God, because only God can. Verse 7 here says, deep calls unto deep at the noise of their waterfalls. That faith that is within us, that is within every man, that faith is calling out to God. It's actually calling out to God. It is pulling us towards God. That faith that God has placed within us. He doesn't place anything in us that's going to pull us away from Him. God places that within us, what's going to draw us back to Him. That faith is calling. That faith is deep down inside of us. Only God can reach. Deep calls unto deep at the noise of the waterfall. If you've ever stood by a waterfall, waterfalls are loud. Big waterfalls, a little trickle of things. Big waterfalls are loud. So if you're trying to call somebody next, and you're standing next to a waterfall, or they're standing next to a waterfall, you have to yell at the top of your lungs. You have to yell with an urgency just to get them to hear you. So deep calls to deep. The faith that is within us is calling back out to God, and it's calling out with the urgency of being next to a loud waterfall, just crashing down next to it, trying to be heard, striving to be heard. Deep calls to deep. That faith that God has placed within man is what, when man turns away from God, when man refuses to, that's where other religions come from. Because man has to have faith in something. American Indians had faith, they put their faith, the tribes, they put their faith in fire, in the water, in animals, in the sun, in the moon. That's where all these different false gods come from, because man's faith, the faith that God has placed within us, has to connect to something. It draws man to something. If it didn't, then we wouldn't have all these different false religions, and that we wouldn't have all the false teachings that we have, because that faith within man is drawing us unto God. But the man in his intellectual mind sometimes turns away and misses the mark. But if we'll connect that faith, if we'll take that faith, connect it to God, and just believe who He is, like it says in Hebrews 11:6, that they who come to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of they that diligently seek Him. If you're coming unto God for who He is, then He shall reward you. He'll reward you. Rewards come throughout, because to the non-believer who comes to God, believing that He is, the reward is salvation. And once you're saved and you continually seek God, the rewards they keep coming. They just keep coming, because He rewards us with peace. He rewards us with mercy. He rewards us with all the things that He gives us that the world can't take. So it says, without faith, finally, the word in Hebrews 11:6, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Faith is so key. It's so important. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. For it's by grace you have been saved through faith. Faith is important. We have to walk by faith and not by sight. Things we see or don't see, don't get it done for us. Our faith gets it done for us. Every step, every trial, every tribulation, everything we come across, it's just one more thing that helps us strengthen our faith. It helps our faith grow in God. It helps our faith grow, and God helps it expand, because Jesus said that we just have the faith of a mustard seed. Mustard seed. We can move mountains. There's not a way we move with it. Never did. Be able to. So, our faith, just remember, feed your faith, grow your faith, strengthen your faith, but make sure your faith is connected to God. Amen. That's our word. We're going to have our altar prayer from the lost.